What fanboy or fangirl does not know who Kevin Smith is? I mean, with all the comics he's done, the movies, the TV shows, the interviews, his relationship with people like Stan Lee, or just everything he's done for the fan community, he is the nerd's nerd. There's one thing I really like about him. Besides me, his humor is great. I've listened to some of his humor. I've read one of his books, and they're all funny. But one of the things that I love about the guy is the fact that my favorite Spider-Man villain is his as well. It's a little thing, but I love it. So I never saw any Kevin Smith films really before 2 years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, right around when the pandemic started, basically. I had seen Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, but I didn't understand that film at the time. So I thought, Clerks is on my 1001 movies to see before you die list. And that just got me interested in, okay, let's just watch all his films. And I have to say, I'm glad I did. There are some that aren't that good, and there are some that are like, eh. And then there are some that I just love. For example, I love Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, just because I know there's a lot of things in it that I might say I don't like in other films. But to be honest, part of I think that it's talking about nerds, it's fandoms, it's just, I like when we make fun of things that are in our genre or our wheelhouse, things that we love. But when it comes to the Clerks franchise, I wasn't really a fan of that first movie. To me, it was boring. I wasn't into the black and white thing. I felt like it didn't really go anywhere. But that was just me. Then I saw Clerks 2, and I loved it. Basically, I thought it was a great story. I thought the characters worked better. It felt more like a normal movie to me, with character development, straightforward story. Yes, there were jokes in there, but the jokes made sense for the movie. Now, with the original Clerks, I will say I understand that was Kevin Smith's first film, so I do give it a pass when you think about that. So now here we are at Clerks 3. And I have to say, I'm actually really excited to see it, because this will be the first Kevin Smith film I've seen in theaters. I wanted to see Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, but that didn't happen. And to be honest, that's really the only reason I'm excited to see it. Because it's like, ooh, it's a limited engagement. I feel so special, that type of thing. But I'm a little bit nervous about it, because the trailers have been good, but I'm afraid that they're going to do too much of the meta jokes. It's going to be overboard. I feel like it's going to be more like Clerks 1, which isn't good to me. But I'm just hoping that it'll be good. I mean, I have heard that this is based on Kevin Smith's life in general, the different aspects of it. So, I mean, they do say write what you know, so he's writing what he knows. But, I mean, I can handle this stuff in only so much, or it has to be done right. Like I said in one of my other reviews, I'm not a fan of Mel Brooks. I do like some of his movies, but I'm just not a fan of his whole breaking the fourth wall thing that he does, or the way he does it. I'm hoping that Kevin Smith, it works here. I'm hoping this is more in the vein of Jay and Silent Bob Reboot with more story. I think that would be perfect. So, enough babbling. How about I go in, see this movie, and I'll let you know what I think when I come out for this unedited movie review for Clerks 3. I know it's been a few weeks since Clerks 3 has come out and since it left theaters, but I wanted to talk about this movie because there's just something about it that I really loved and enjoyed. I mean, there are movies in the Clerksverse, I'll call it, I don't know if that's the actual name for it, that are fantastic, and some that just don't hit for me. And some that people love that I'm like, they don't work for me. The Clerks movies specifically have been definitely a mixed bag, because the first film, I was not a fan of it. Now I've seen it again, and it's definitely not as bad the second time around, since I knew what to expect and certain things I could look for. But Clerks 2, I saw that and I loved it. I think it was because the first film to me didn't really feel like it had a story. The second one felt like it had more of a story to me. But what I love about Clerks 3 is they take 1 and 2 and mash it together, and we get a hodgepodge, a melting pot of both these ideas, both these types of films, and we get it in one, and it's done so well. There are things in this movie you expect because you saw them in the trailer, but there are also things that happen in this movie that, to be honest, I did not expect them to do or for Kevin Smith to do. And there were things I learned later on after watching the movie that, makes some of these things make sense more. But hopefully I'll do those things in another short spoiler video. Anyway, before I get into more of the story and the characters and all that, let's start off with something very simple and get it out of the way. The cameos. Now, we do have some, what I'll say, normal Kevin Smith cameos, like Ben Affleck, Justin Long, and of course, because he has to put his family in this movie, like all his other ones, you've got Harley Quinn Smith, his daughter. Now, there are other ones that are, let's be honest, these are the nerdy ones. These are the ones for the true geek in all of us that go to these movies. We've seen them before in some other films, but they're not as prevalent, at least to my knowledge, as those first ones that I mentioned. These ones include Sarah Michelle Gellar, Melissa Benoist, Freddie Prinze Jr., and my personal favorite, brand new ones, I don't think they've been in any of Smith's films before, the Impractical Jokers. I just love those guys. I think they're hilarious. The one, though, that I will say was a surprise that I didn't see, unless he was in the background and I just totally missed him, was Matt Damon, which is a surprise to me because quite often he's in a lot of these Kevin Smith films. I mean, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, they go together like peanut butter and jelly to most people, though that's not me. Anyway, so let's move on and let's talk about the cast itself. Now, normally I'd probably talk about the leads first, but I want to talk about Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith first, otherwise known as Jay and Silent Bob. Honestly, for me, these are probably the weakest of the main characters in this film. Now, they're not, let me clarify, they are not the most annoying characters in the movie. That's somebody else. But I feel like they're just the same. I feel like there's really been no evolution for their characters over every single film that they've been in. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue that Jay has had a daughter and that's made him grow as a parent. But then these things just don't seem to reflect back in this story or this movie. I mean, there's things that show up that you could assume tie in, but they never come out and say it. So that's why I feel like there's really no character development for them, or what little they do in other movies doesn't pay off or doesn't come over into this film. Though I will say that Silent Bob, I do like what they do with his character, because this is most clearly Kevin Smith playing himself. Because there are certain things that Silent Bob does that it's like, okay, clearly you're telling us what you think of your movies or how you work. And this is an idea of, well, you guys ask me these questions at cons at times, so here, I'm just going to tell you what I think. And I like that. Now, I will say, I think some of the best moments for Jay and Silent Bob are when they're not their stereotypical stoner, crackpot selves. For example, there's a dance scene. I'm not going to say how it happens or exactly what goes on, but I laughed because it was so funny. And the other scene that I started mentioning is a scene I will call the director scene. And that involves Silent Bob. But that's all I'm going to say on that. If you've seen the movie, you know what scene I'm talking about. I love that moment because we get such an insight into Kevin Smith as a person. Based on stories that I've heard Kevin Smith say, both in books he's written and in his stand up that I've listened to, Muse is just playing himself when it comes to Jay, it feels like. I mean, I can't see a difference based on at least what I know or have heard about Jason Mewes. I can't really see a difference between him and Jay. Maybe that was the intent. Maybe that's the purpose. But sometimes I'm like, well, if you're just the same person, why don't you keep the same name? Who knows? But like I said, that part of it just doesn't quite work for me. Now, I know plenty of people love Jay and Silent Bob. I mean, they've gotten their own movies. And I love one of their movies. But I just feel like, overall, like I've said, they work at times, but other times they haven't evolved enough to really make me care about them in movies like this. Now, let's talk about the main cast here, or at least the main characters as far as I'm concerned. You got Brian O'Halloran, sorry if I mispronounced that, as Dante, and you've got Jeff Anderson playing Randall again. I think this is the best these two have ever been. I admit I haven't watched anything else that they're in. I looked up their resumes, and it seems like the Clerks stuff is really the main things they've done. But this movie, to me, really shows how far they've come as far as acting chops, acting abilities go. This is the best I have ever seen them. And they got me to care about Dante and Randall more in this movie than I cared about them ever before. Now, it's clear and obvious, though, to me through this entire film that things do feel natural. There's a lot of moments where you do get that first Clerks feel, where it's just them goofing off and being themselves. And it works here. It really works. But that's what these movies are supposed to be. But for some reason, I like it more here than I did in that first film. Both of these characters, like I said, they've grown, but they're more complex. And I like complexity of characters. Now, I don't want characters to be just complex and that's it, and boring, and no story, and no fun, because you get plenty of that in this film. But they're just complex. Clearly they've grown. Clearly they have life experiences. We may not have seen every single thing that happened. We hear about certain things. But you know what? Even if we didn't hear about certain things, it's still clear just by how they act, the way they talk. It's clear that they've been through some stuff that most of us would rather forget, or clearly they'd rather forget some of it too. Like I said, I found myself invested in caring more about these characters. I felt like I could relate to them, which honestly is not something I really could before. I mean, yes, I could relate to the nerd stuff before, because that's just the type of guy I am. And I could relate to dealing with customers and people being jerks and that whole scenario. But I still felt like they just didn't feel real to me either. Maybe it was just because I wasn't invested in the previous films. But whatever the case, here I found myself caring more about these characters. I felt like I knew them. It felt like friendships I've had, feelings of lacking any real substance, of lacking any real motive or fullness, maybe completion in tasks or in life overall. All that was there. So I found myself really relating to them, especially it seemed Randall at first with wanting to make a movie, wanting to do that. But then as it progresses, I realized I was more like Randall. But that's the long version of saying I felt like I could relate to these characters that I've been in spots they've been in. I know people that have been in their spots. These two characters, they were the reason to watch this movie. if you didn't care about any of the other characters, I could say you still should or still could watch this movie and enjoy it just because of how good these two characters were. They truly made the movie for me. But then, of course, you can't have main characters without side characters. And right off the bat, I'm going to say Trevor Furman. I know I'm saying that name wrong, and I'm sorry. Who plays Eliza, whatever. At first, he was funny. I laughed because I'm like, okay, I know a person just like this. I have this person in my family. But after the inciting incident of the film, he just went downhill. I mean, right after it was funny, but then after that, yeah, I just found it to be annoying. His reason for being in the film, what he was doing, it just didn't work for me. So, yeah, he was the most annoying character in the movie for me. I didn't care about what he was doing. I wanted him to leave. I mean, you do see by the end, he serves his purpose. He does do things. But I just didn't care about him at all. There were moments in this movie that I know from his specific scenes, I knew they were supposed to be funny. But all I asked was, really? Is that what we're doing with this? Is that the joke you're making? Really? So yeah, a character that honestly I could have done without, and I wish would have just not been in the movie or been better written. Maybe cut his jokes back a little bit, maybe cut back his strong personality that he has. Maybe I could have stood him a little bit more. But as he is in the movie, yeah, he's definitely my least favorite character. Then Rosie Dawson's back as Becky. And do I really need to say anything? It's Rosie Dawson. She's great. She's fantastic, as she always is. I'm not going to go too far into her character because there's a lot of spoiler stuff with her, along with other cast members that show up. Now, if you've seen the movie, you know who I'm talking about. If you've seen any of the other Clerks movies, you might be able to guess who shows up. But I'm not going to spoil it here. When the movie opens, it feels like you have two separate movies that are trying to be in one film. In one part, you've got Clerks. You've got that feel, you know, just the another day here at the office. I don't want to be here. I'm not even supposed to be here today type feel to it. And then you've got the Clerks 2 with more emotion, more of a story, better character work as far as I'm concerned. And it's like they're butting heads. They're trying to, you know, how are we going to fit? It's a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit together. However, as the movie progresses, both these tones, both these voices find a way to meld and become one very well told, solid movie, all its own. And I think the key here is what I've been saying. It's the tone of the film. It finds its own voice. It's not trying to be one anymore. It's not trying to be two. It's trying to be its own movie, and it succeeds. I was concerned, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was concerned about the whole behind the scenes, making a movie about my life premises that this movie seemed to state overly in the trailers. But honestly, that works. And that's not really the focal point of the story. Yes, it's like the driving force behind everything that happens. But the script and the story and the characters really work well together. That you see, that's just the incident. That's just what brings them together. That's just the action. That's what they're going through. And it's bringing out these feelings, these memories, these thoughts. And it's the idea that by making this movie, they're reflecting on their life. They're reflecting on the things they've done. So it's not really about making a movie, which to me, that's what the trailers made you believe this movie was going to be about. But it's not. So if Kevin Smith or whoever put the trailers together meant for that to happen, meant to trick you into thinking it was one way, they did a good job, because there's so much more to it than just making a movie about my life. And that's it. It flows very well. I mentioned that when I was talking about tone. It flows very well. I never felt like there was a moment that I really said, that could be cut. You don't need that. Maybe some of the gags went on a little bit longer than they should have, primarily with Trevor's character and his whole shtick. That was the stuff that I felt like, okay, you need to cut that back, or you don't really need that. But it wasn't distracting enough that it really took me away from the movie. Did I find it annoying? Like I said, yes. But it didn't take me out of the movie. And it moved along, and I cared about where we were going. And I like that. There was nothing that really overstayed its welcome. Again, except for what I mentioned earlier. There is going to be an unpopular point I have right now. And I know major fans of the Clerks films are going to be like, no, we love that part. That's the whole reason for this movie. It's part of the Clerks films and blah, blah, blah. And I get that. But for me, the opening scene, as the credits start, it's the only big part of this film that I was like, okay, can we pick it up a little bit? Okay, even diehard fans know what you're doing. Like, it just felt like this was one of those moments that was fan service for fan service. Again, I get why they did it, and I know diehards will love it. But I also just felt like you could have sped through it a little bit quicker, because if you've seen the movies, you know what's happening, you get the jokes. But again, that's just me. It should be obvious that most of the jokes in this film are in the trailers, because that's just how comedies work. It seems like the best jokes are always in the trailers to get your behind in that seat, so you'll pay your however much money to watch the movie. The same thing goes here. The majority of the best jokes are in the trailers, but there's still plenty in this film to laugh at, to have a good time with. But again, most of the hard-hitting jokes are in the trailers, and that's a little disappointing. Finally, overall, while this is definitely not my favorite story as far as Kevin Smith's Clerks movies go, or, just this universe he created, I will admit, I think it's the best told. And like I said, I think it's the best performed as well. There's just so much about this movie that works. From the script, to the performances, to just completing a trilogy. Which is kind of funny when you think about it. You got the Clerks trilogy, and us as nerds, how many trilogies do we have? I mean, think about it. You've got the 3 different Star Wars trilogies, if you're a Star Wars fan. You've got a couple trilogies in Marvel, at least for now. Trilogies are just something that we as nerds kind of come to expect and come to enjoy, usually. But, so I just kind of find that funny a little bit, that, hey, now we've got a Clerks trilogy. Now wait, he'll do a Clerks 4 at some point, but let's hope not, because I feel like this movie ended it perfectly. I feel like this movie had the best emotion, and it was definitely, when it comes to emotion, it was definitely the most emotional one of the 3. I'd say it's one of the most emotional movies he's done. With maybe, I think Chasing Amy is probably a little more emotional than this one. There's probably like 1 or 2 other ones, but this is definitely one of the most emotional ones for me that he's done. And I can't believe I'm saying that about a Clerks film. But hey, everybody can surprise you. So, what ranking would I give Clerks 3? Well, Overall, I have some issues with it. The one character, maybe a little bit of the pacing, though that's not a huge thing. Do I think, though, first and foremost, if you haven't seen the first two Clerks films, that you can go into this film and appreciate it and enjoy it without seeing them? Yes, you can go in and you'll enjoy this movie, and it will be definitely emotional, but it will definitely help more, as in most sequels, if you've seen at least one of those original Clerks films. It'll just give you a much better appreciation for the film, and you'll understand everything a lot better. So if you haven't, I do recommend personally seeing the first two Clerks films before you see this one. But with that being said, I think I'm going to give this the rank of superhero. Yeah, it's really good, and I highly recommend this film. I mean, even if you see this film and you haven't seen the first two, I think it's going to get you interested in seeing the first two, because you'll find yourself actually invested with these characters and wanting to know where certain jokes or certain gags come from. But what do you think? Have you seen Clerks 3? Or are you waiting for it to come out on Blu-ray, DVD, a streaming service, whatever? If you've seen it, comment down below, no spoilers in this video. What did you think about it? Am I way off in left field that this is not that great of a movie? Or am I not giving it enough praise? Whatever your thoughts, comment down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, from here at Fandom University, remember, read what you love, enjoy what you love, and let's all work for a better fandom. I'll see you next time.